that might feel like something that's really hard to fathom when you think about the fact that you might still be struggling with getting out of bed in the morning, right? How do you find meaning when it's so painful to be experiencing what you're experiencing? I understand from doing this for a long time that finding meaning takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. But no matter where you are in this grief trajectory, whether you are very newly bereaved, whether you are months out, maybe even a year or two out, there are steps that you can take even right from the beginning that sort of set you up for this process to find meaning. Because what we're learning is that when we can find meaning in our grief and loss, it really helps us to move forward. It really helps us to find out who we are, which really is what a lot of people who have had a loss question. Who am I now without my person? Who am I now since I've experienced this loss? Okay, so due to the nature of the presentation being online, again, I'm just going to make you cognizant of the fact that we'd love for you to mute if you just jumped on and didn't hear me say that. And then what I'm going to do is ask, again, take your camera off if you do have to move around a lot. We will go through the presentation, and then at the end of the presentation, I will be taking questions through the chat. So know that my presentation, while this whole event is scheduled for 90 minutes, will not take 90 minutes. So there'll be plenty of time for questions at the end. Okay, so feel comfortable asking whatever questions you have, not just on my presentation, but perhaps you have some general grief-related questions, some things that you've been struggling with, and I'm happy to jump in and address those as well. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. So if you will just give me a second to do that and get set, we will get started. And again, jot down your questions. I would love to address as many questions as you have at the end. Okay, can everybody see the screen? Is everybody able to see the screen that's up currently? Okay, all right, wonderful. All right, let's get started and going ahead. I like to start this presentation with these two quotes, because I think that these two quotes really tie into the idea of what we're talking about when we talk about meaning. The first quote says, "Death does not have to be a catastrophic, destructive thing. Indeed, it can be viewed as one of the most constructive, positive, and creative elements of culture and life." This is by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who you may have heard of. She's considered one of the authorities on grief and loss. The second quote talks about the fact that each of us has the ability to choose how we respond to even the most terrible of circumstances. The last of human freedoms is to choose one's attitude in any set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. And that's by Viktor Frankl, who you may have heard of or read his book, Man's Search for Meaning. He was in a concentration camp and talked about how to find meanings in even the worst of circumstances. So I start this presentation with these two quotes because I imagine that most of you coming here tonight think about the fact that death is an awful thing. How can I even think about it as constructive or positive in any way, shape, or form? Well, this is what we're going to talk about tonight. How do we find meaning? Because the life of your loved one who you lost had a lot of meaning, right? And to give so much credence to the pain and the sorrow and the grief without remembering the gift of that person, what that person gave to you, is really to negate the meaning, the possible meaning that could be in this loss. So we want to talk a little bit about that. And then the second quote is really about a sense of control. You may feel very out of control in your grief. And this is talking about how even in the worst of circumstances, we have some control about the outcome. Okay, so let's talk about kind of a starting point, right? And there's something that's called the meaning-centered model of grief. And you may think, what the heck? There's actually models of grief. Well, there are quite a number of models of grief. This is one that really ties in, though, with meaning, right? And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. So there's 4 steps to this meaning-centered model of grief and how we might find meaning in grief. The first step is to mourn the loss. The second is to accept the loss. Third is to adjust the loss. And the last is to transform the loss. Now, I'm going to be cognizant of the fact that some of you here are very newly bereaved, okay? You may hear some of this and think, I can't even possibly imagine I could get to those stages. Some of you may be finding yourself in one stage clearly when I go on to describe what those stages are. Some of you may say, I'm stuck between the first and the second, or the second and the third. And some of you may be saying, I'm stuck on one of them, but I really want to get to the next one. How do I do so? That's what we're going to look at. So let's take a look at this through the lens of the fact that there's no pressure to be in a certain place with your grief, right? This is why sometimes models can be a little difficult, because it assumes that people follow some sort of a natural trajectory, which doesn't always happen. So let's start with the first one, mourning the loss. Those of you who are more newly bereaved, this is probably going to resonate a lot with you, right? You're in that phase of numbness and shock. Roller coaster of emotions, right? One day you're feeling a little better, the next day you're feeling like you're on your knees, right? Lots of emotions whirling around. Some days anger, some days guilt, shame, hostility, sadness, all of them. You never know what you're going to wake up and find in a given day, right? And this is the stage where we really work on clarifying the emotions, figuring out what you're feeling, recognizing those things. And then, eventually in this phase, as time goes on, you'll probably tend to settle into something that feels sort of just like a deep sense of sadness, right? You may have lost the anger, you may have given away the guilt, but just a heaviness, like a weight that you carry around with you. And again, not a linear process here, right? You may be going in and out of these things at different times. Eventually, as you continue to move forward, those of you who've been doing this a little bit longer, as you know, some of these cycles become less frequent, less intense, right? You might say, I'm crying a little bit less than I used to, or I'm still crying every day, but now I'm only crying for 10 minutes. I used to cry all day long. So there's changes that happen as you go through this. Again, for those who are newer, you might be very much in the emotion stage here. Now, for those of you in this phase, we say, well, okay, then how do we find meaning if we're so deeply entrenched in the pain of the loss? The way we find meaning is really at this stage in trying to recall and relive positive moments with your loved one. Grief tends to be very much about sadness, about all the pain and all the negative, right? The first step toward meaning, and this is a baby step, right? But it's something that we can begin the process with, even if we're not really ready to full dive into meaning, is really thinking, what were some of those positive moments? How do I take that one moment of pain, looking at my loved one in the hospital bed, when they just looked terrible and they were dying and I knew they only had a little time left? And how do I turn that around to that wonderful memory of that afternoon in the park with them when we had such a great time and they were so full of life and joy, right? How do we balance that out? The next phase we're going to talk about is accepting the loss. This may be the most basic of tasks, but it's also the hardest one to manage, right? Coming to this place of acceptance. Now, we know cognitively, intellectually, we are very aware that our loved one is gone. I don't think there's anybody here tonight that's going to say, no, I think my loved one's still here. But how do we accept that socially, emotionally, behaviorally, spiritually? How do we come to some place of peace with that, to say, okay, I know it intellectually, but now I'm going to behave like that out in the world. I'm going to be out in the world acting as if my loved one isn't here. And that doesn't mean ignoring your person's existence in any way. It just means not saying, I can't leave the house, so I'm going to stay home because they might be walking in that door any minute. Or I can't have feelings or attachment to somebody else because that would somehow be negating my love for my loved one. So we're trying in this phase to really deal a lot with these intrusive thoughts and ruminations, right? What if I had been there? What were those last minutes like? I don't want to picture them being sick. I don't want to picture them during chemo, whatever it may be. We're trying to lower the level of those intrusive thoughts that you're experiencing. Spiritual acceptance for those who might have be more inclined to be religious or spiritual. We start coming to a place of acceptance, sometimes really by thinking of the idea of establishing a spiritual connection to the person. We're not leaving them. We're not apart from them. They're still very much with us, but on a spiritual level, right? We might think of them as heaven, or floating around us, or something else that causes us to feel more comfort. If you don't feel that way, we think about some other things, other ways that we might want to look at that. Ideally, the concept is that this is a really hard part to come to pass, right? To really have this emotional acceptance, because we have to begin to rid ourselves of this fear that if we let go of some of that pain, we're moving on and we're not honoring our loved one. Third part of the model is adjusting to the loss, right? So this is when we really start doing some of that hard work out in the world, right? We need to make these mental and behavioral changes to adapt to the new dynamics, right? We need to adjust in our own families first, right? What roles did that person have? Now the family doesn't have that person in that role. How do we all adjust our roles around them? How do we have a larger social network? Are we able to go out with couples but as a single? Can we get more comfortable with that? Can we get comfortable with expanding and meeting new people, broadening our life with people who our loved one never knew? Can we come to a place of acceptance with that? So this requires a lot of working through some of your own stuff. Many of you have mentioned to me in groups that you really carry with yourself a lot of negative thoughts about yourself, right? A lot of lack of forgiveness. I wish I had gotten that second opinion. I wish I hadn't told the hospice nurse to give them more morphine. These things are sitting with you, right? Weighing you down. We have to find a way to let go of some of these things, some of this self-pity, and also some of this kind of self-abuse that's happening. Because when we can do that, we can really start working on getting more meaning. Final phase, again, for many of you, this might feel really far off at this point in time, but for some of you who I know have been in groups with me for a while, you might be moving closer to this. You're starting the initial conversations with yourself about this, and this is really transforming the loss. How do we move from struggling with the loss on a daily basis, from those feelings of guilt, from those feelings of pain, to a future, to thinking about a future, to redefining your own personal self-identity and life goals? Who are you now without your spouse, without your child, without your mother, father, whoever it is you're here grieving tonight? How do you move forward with your own life, right? This is going to require a lot of investment on your part, right? Psychological energy, we call it, right? You're going to have to get out there. It doesn't come to you. It doesn't happen. You know, sometimes people think, they go by the expression, you know, time heals all wounds. Well, not really. Your wounds are there and they don't get healed unless you work on healing them, right? Time doesn't just fix everything. You have to be making the effort to make the kinds of changes that are going to help you to heal. And this might be making new friends, developing new plans for yourself to do something that you enjoy. Maybe you're artistic and you want to get back into painting, or maybe you want to get a new job. Maybe you want to sell your house. Maybe you want to volunteer, whatever it may be. These are the kinds of things that we want to start thinking about in this process. Again, who are you now without your spouse? So lots of new meanings, lots of reconstruction with the life. You're really basically allowing yourself to reauthor your own story. Who is the new you? Okay, so you're hearing all this in the model, and that's all good and fine, right? And then you're like, well, I'm sorry, I'm still stuck with the idea of like, why did this happen to me? Right? What did I do to deserve this? How do I move forward? You know, and how do I move forward for those of you who had a loss during COVID? How do I move forward when I couldn't even really grieve the loss of my loved one properly? I didn't have a proper funeral. I couldn't have a memorial. All of these things might be sitting with you, right? So when we talk about meaning and searching for meaning, we're trying to take these kinds of questions. We're trying to change them. We're trying to turn them away from these kind of questions to these bigger questions, right? This is where meaning is. Now we want to talk about not why did this happen to me, but who am I now? Who am I without my loved one? What would I be if I changed and grew with this loss? Who will I be if I don't change and grow with this loss, right? If I remain stagnant and I don't think about these things of who I am in the next step, how do I find meaning in my own life? And likewise, how do I reinforce the meaning of my loved one's life, right? Important thing to remember is meaning requires hope. Grieving minds don't have hope. When you're grieving, it feels hopeless, right? I've heard it many times in groups. I feel hopeless, helpless. I don't have anything that I'm really interested in. I just don't have hope, right? So meaning, on the other hand, is all about hope, right? We want to figure out, how do we get hope back into our vocabulary? You know, your loved one's death is permanent, that's for sure. We can't change that. But your loss of hope, we want that to be temporary. We don't want that to be permanent. Death ends the life, but it doesn't end your relationship with your loved one. You're always connected to your loved one, no matter what. And this is addressing that fear that we hear so often in groups. I can't move forward. I can't hope for something more because I'm leaving them behind. But you're not really leaving them behind, right? You're maintaining that connection with them. Whether, again, you're a spiritual person and you feel it as a spiritual connection, whether you are maintaining it through other forms that we're going to talk about in a little while, you're never forgetting them. You're never leaving them. You're never separate from them emotionally. But you don't have to be sitting in pain. We want to connect to them in love instead of pain. Remember, death doesn't end the relationship. This is more of the same, right? You're not closing the door on the relationship. You're opening a door to a new kind of relationship with them, right? And how are you going to maintain that relationship? I can't see everybody here, so I'm going to ask you to just think of this in your mind, but think about whether you think you still have a relationship with the person you lost. My guess is, even though you're not answering me out loud, my guess is most of you say yes. It looks different, but of course I still have a relationship with them, right? I talk to them still. I walk around, I talk to them, I look at their picture, I go to the cemetery, I think of them, I started a foundation in their name and something like that, right? You still very much feel this connection. 80% of bereaved say they still feel their loved one's presence after death. So I put this in here for the important point of letting you know you're not going to forget them. You're not ever going to lose this connection to them. So that's something to sort of drop from your thoughts and your vocabulary. Moving forward in steps to find meaning, or moving forward with your life, is not severing that connection. Okay, so kind of some reminders for what we've talked about a little bit up to this point. Question is not why me, or how do I, but more, how do I find meaning in this loss? You woke up today for a reason. What is that reason? You came here tonight for a reason, right? You want to find out about meaning. You want to know what that looks like. You're in search of meaning. You're in search of purpose. You're in search of who you are without them. That's why you're here. So that shows me there is a will and an interest already, just because you're sitting here tonight. So we're going to work on some thoughts about how you might better find that meaning in your life. Most important, and right from the get-go, and most of you here, as I said, I know because you have participated in the wonderful offerings we have at Cancer Wellness Center for bereavement. Grief needs dedicated time, right? To find your meaning, you're going to have to manage a lot of the stuff that you're feeling right now and change your mindsets about the way you've been dealing with grief up to this point, right? That can be done in counseling, groups, support groups, educational events like we have tonight, right? There's really always options to help you keep that momentum no matter what. And let's think about removing never and always from your vocabulary. This is something that pretty much anybody who's lost someone does. I'm never going to be the same again. I'm never going to, well, I'm never going to have fun anymore. I'm never going to travel again. I'm never going to do these things. Or I'm always going to feel sad. I'm always going to feel pain. I'm always going to struggle with this, right? These never and always are really difficult words. We don't want to have words like that in our vocabulary. Again, even for those of you who are really new to this grief and can't quite get fully to the meaning part of it, this is again where you begin those little baby steps toward meaning. When you catch yourself saying never or always, let's turn it. Let's change it. I'm never going to be happy again. How about I will be happy again someday? I'm always going to feel this sad. I'm always going to feel sadness, but it won't feel like this. It will soften and change, and I'll be able to go on. That's how we sort of start these steps toward meaning. And I love this last line, and I stole this, but I love it because I think it really says a lot. Don't expect that your grief will get smaller. You must get bigger. Right? You're always going to grieve this person. Your grief for them doesn't diminish, but how you change and grow will really have a lot to do with how you continue to find meaning and move forward, right? You have to get bigger. You have to get new strategies. You have to work on this and figure out how you are going to get a handle on it so you're not remaining stuck where you are. So why don't we find that? Why don't we heal or find meaning, right? Why, for those of you who say, I'm still feeling really stuck, I can't find meaning, I can't heal, I'm trying, but I can't, right? So why is this? A lot of the times, really, the pain or what feels familiar in the pain, even though it sounds very odd to say this, it can feel more comfortable than really thinking about going on to a future without them, right? Neither feels good, but the future without them feels scarier. So we sit in the pain, we sit in the grief. It's familiar, we know it, and we're kind of learning how to manage it a little bit. So we're just going to hang here because it's really scary to think about doing anything but that. Number one. Number two, we don't know what to do with the love, right? We had a lot of love we gave to this person. What do we do with it now? Where does it go, right? There's not somebody necessarily that's standing right next to you that says, I'll take it. So we have to really rethink this. How do we take that love and how do we put it in new places? Other people, family members, into our work, into the community. This is what we have to decide, because that love is there to give. It has to go somewhere. We have to think about that. Why else don't we heal? Well, we get stuck, right? Images, feelings of disloyalty. I know everyone here has talked to me about those images, right? Oh, those terrible days when you can't stop thinking about those last days or those last moments or that last trip to the hospital. And we get stuck in it, can't get out of it. And it really makes us feel stuck. Or again, this idea of disloyalty that we talked about a few minutes ago. How can I possibly go out and have a good time with friends tonight and have dinner and a cocktail because that feels bad. He can't do that. He's not here to do that. It's wrong of me to do that. Right. So that's getting stuck in those things. And we get fixated on this what if and if only, right? This is real where we talk about like the self-abuse, right? What if I did this? What if I did that? If only I did this, if only I did that. Have to move away from those thoughts of this being your fault. Death is not your fault, not your fault. Other reasons why we don't heal, we interrupt our grief. We can't heal if we don't feel. So I also know that a lot of you have said to me, when I'm, I have those days when I'm feeling really awful and I'm crying I don't want to cry. I'm crying. I'm out with my friends and we're having a nice dinner and somebody says something that triggers me and I start crying. And then I have to shut it down. I have to shut it down because I don't want them to be upset. I don't want to upset my friends. I don't want to make them feel bad, right? So what are you doing? You're interrupting your own grief. You're shutting it down and you have to feel it. You have to let it come out and you have to feel it. And if you keep shutting it down, it doesn't go away. it comes out at another time. So you can shut it down for a month, you can shut it down for 5 years, but 5 years from now, if you shut it down, it's going to come out somehow. Something will trigger it. So allow yourself to feel it, allow yourself to express it, and stop interrupting it. Right? And this idea of fear, the last one or last reason why we don't find meaning, we're just afraid, right? A ship in a harbor is safe, but that's not what ships were for, right? So we know you're safe in sort of sticking and staying in this grief spot. But that's not what you were made for. You're here on this earth. There's a plan for you of some kind. We don't know what it is, but you're here, and the plan has to involve you living your life and doing whatever that life requires you to do. Here's some of the things that influence how we look at grief and why we sometimes get stuck. A lot can have to do with your background, right? Your age, the kind of individual you are a glass half empty or a glass half full person, background of the deceased, your family, the way your family looked at grief. Did your family mourn for years and stay in grief? Did your family kind of move on quickly from grief? Did it acknowledge it, not acknowledge it? All these things really play a role in how you might be handling your current situation. And it'll be a little bit different for everybody. Also, your relationship with the person who died. Right? Very loving relationship is going to feel very different than a conflicted relationship, right? Conflicted relationship could be still have love, but there could be issues, right? Maybe there's some kind of history. Maybe there was a substance abuse issue, infidelity issue, something like that that kind of lurked in the past. And that might cause you to be really conflicted about this loss in a lot of ways. And that can make it more difficult to find the meaning. Okay, so let's look at some questions, right? When we're trying to find your personal sense of meaning, let's look at some questions that can kind of help guide you along the way. Right? First one, what could death not touch, right? When we get mired in our grief and we get really stuck in those feelings, we have to start looking outside of the grief. What could death not touch? Well, my spouse gave me 2 beautiful children, and death couldn't touch that, right? It couldn't ruin that. My spouse, I don't know, created this wonderful foundation, and death couldn't touch that. It's still here, and it's still alive and growing. Find those things for your spouse that are still very much present in the world that death couldn't take away. They'll look different for every one of you here, but that's what you want to think about, right? Remember that death did not negate your life and end your life. It took away your spouse, but there's still, and perhaps your parent, or perhaps your child, and perhaps another relative, but it didn't end everything. So how do we foster and grow those parts of us that remain? That's what we want to find out. You have a lot of good in all of you. How do we kind of develop that to move forward? One way to think about it is, what beliefs or values did they have that can help you in your grief and growth? Perhaps you had a spouse or a family member who was really kind of that glass half full person who loved to be positive and just let things roll off them. Maybe those are some of the beliefs or values that you didn't necessarily have, but you have to think about and say, how can I incorporate some of that? How does that bring meaning to the loss? If I can make some changes in myself based on something that they gifted me by teaching me. What do you have control over, right? What do you have control over and not have control over? Think about it. What would my future self and my loved one hope to see my life become? I think this comes up a lot in groups as well, right? When we really want to suffer, we just want to feel bad and we want to stay stuck in our grief. It can be really helpful to ask this question. Is this what your loved one would want for you? Is this what you would want for them if the tables were turned? Would you want them remaining stuck for years, not feeling any love, not experiencing what it's like to live? I'm imagining probably not is the answer. right? So think about that. That can really be helpful to helping you discover this meaning, right? Starting to move forward. And what ways can you find meaning that can help you heal and honor them, right? We'll talk about a little bit more about this in a few minutes, but how do we honor the loved one? Honoring our loved one, memorializing them in some way can really help us to find meaning in their loss and can really help us to find meaning in our own lives. And again, we'll get some examples of that coming up. Here are some of the examples we're talking about. So what does meaning look like? Let's talk about some practical stuff, right? Finding gratitude for the time we had with a loved one, that actually is a lot of meaning. That may say, well, that's not you may think that's not a tangible thing. Well, it is, right? We want to give meaning to the life that they had. And by finding gratitude for that in whatever way that looks like for you, that is creating meaning in their life. They lived, they gifted you whatever it was that you are grateful for, and that creates meaning. You're keeping that meaning alive. Finding ways to commemorate or honor them, right? This can be any number of things. I mean, we plant trees, we have park benches, we have things like that that are tangible. We create organizations and foundations, and we, participate in the Cancer Wellness Center, run walk. We do all of those kinds of things. These are ways that we honor and commemorate. And that brings meaning to their life and also meaning to us for participating in those things. Let's think about how you might take their life and make that a springboard into some kind of major shift or change in your life, right? Oftentimes when we're together in a family or with a spouse for a long time, we kind of get settled in, and some of the things that we love and some of the things that really fulfill us kind of get put aside just because we're busy with our day-to-day stuff. And now you have the opportunity to say, how has this loss made me rethink myself, made me rethink my life? What kind of meaning do I want in my life now, right? Because I know life is short. I know life is fragile. What do I want to do, right? Maybe I always wanted to be an artist, or I've stopped painting and I love doing that. Maybe we want to do that. Maybe we want to create big changes like starting foundations, or maybe it's just simple things like a garden or whatever. Something that you have put aside and not done for a major time. Maybe it's getting a job. Maybe you stayed home and didn't work, but your spouse did. And now you're like, I've always wanted to do that, so I'm going to do it. Meaning can be simple, just feeling changed by knowing them, feeling changed by their death, and really finding ways to create meaning for others, right? This loss may spark in you some interest in creating something more meaningful for somebody who is disadvantaged, right? Maybe volunteering somewhere. Maybe your loved one absolutely adored animals. Maybe you decide that you're going to volunteer at the animal shelter. I'm not sure. It's going to be different for everybody, but you can create something meaningful for others that really keeps your loved one alive. Okay, so we talked about acceptance before as being really the hardest part of finding meaning, but it is the first step to finding meaning, right? We have to get to this place of acceptance that not just cognitively that your loved one is gone, but that we want to do something about this, that we want to make a change, that we still want to live on and honor them, and also honor ourselves to be more, right? To make them proud, to make us proud, right? So first step, easy step, maybe not so easy step. Write about your future. Someday when you get a little bit of free time, nobody's around, you have a white piece of paper and a pen in your hand, write about your future. What do you see? What does it look like? What would you like it to look like? Okay, and it doesn't have to be that you have it all planned out, but what are your thoughts about what it might look like? Give it a shot. You may see a blank page. You may sit there and have no idea. And a blank page is okay. Because what the blank page says is, that means the future is yours to fill. That means you are going to have to step forward and decide what to do with that, right? You can't rely on other people to fill that for you. It's up to you. It's a good exercise to think about this. I love when people do this in a free writing type situation. And I tell them, take 10 minutes and just write about your future without stopping. Don't edit it. Don't cross anything off. Just go ahead and do it and see what you come up with. And then we can kind of back into that and see, okay, so how do we make some of these things a reality for you? Right. Also, what does it teach us? Right? We also in grief feel very out of control most of the time. We feel like we have no control over our lives. We had no control of this cancer that came along. We have no control of the death of our loved one. We can't control our crying. We can't control our grief. We can't control our anger. We feel so out of control. But this exercise shows you that you have control. You can sit there with your thoughts and you can control whatever you want to be. You can write that down, and that's exercising a form of control. So managing thoughts, right? This is something that's really important when we talk about coming to this place of meaning, because we get stuck with our negative thoughts and that holds us back, right? So what we know from science, and there's been research on this, is that negative moments in our life, and I'm not just talking about the death of your loved one, negative moments in our life get more wired in our brain than positive, right? We remember them more. They're just more deeply entrenched. And the positive ones, those good memories, are less likely to get wired into our long-term brain. So how does this all feed into grief? Well, I think you know the answer. Grief, death, cancer. Wow, those are some negative moments, right? Really negative moments. They're so wired into your brain that they kind of make you forget about the good things. They make you forget about the lovely wedding day, the birth of a grandchild, all those things that happened also in your life with your loved one. So we want to try to figure out how we can better do what they call installing the good. How do we take all these negative thoughts that are really keeping you paralyzed, and how do we change them so that you can move toward meaning? Right? One of the exercises that we do is called installing the good. Okay, so this is something that you can just, again, takes practice, but you have to kind of do this a little bit consistently so that we can really start to rewire our brains, which is what we're trying to do. First step, take it and identify a positive meaning or experience that you shared with your loved one. And then just say, I'm going to remember every part of it. I'm going to take 20 to 30 seconds. I'm going to savor it. I'm going to repeat it, the memory, over and over. I'm going to recapture it. I'm going to try to remember, what did my body feel like in that moment? What did my heart feel like in that moment? Hear the laughter of it. Smell the smell of wherever it was you were. Feel the tactile part, right? What did it feel like to be holding your loved one's hand? Whatever it may be. And I want you to sit in that for like 20 to 30 seconds. And this is after our thing tonight. And really absorb the experience. Let it sink in, right? It's a form of visualization. And when we visualize, we know that things can become a part of you, right? If you sit somewhere and visualize being on the beach for a length of time, science has found that this kind of thing can actually stay in your brain, and it almost feels like you actually went to the beach. So this is what we're trying to do here. We're trying to rewire your brain to get more of those positive memories in there. Okay, so living with loss and finding meaning is really about learning to find the good even when we are in pain. And this should apply to other situations in your life as well, but particularly to this one. We want to reframe the thoughts, right? Look up at the picture, right? You see the person cutting the T off the I can't, so it says I can, right? One of the biggest things that happens in loss that prevents us from finding any meaning in it is that we have all these thoughts that we hang on to that we need to reframe, right? So I'm going to show you both sides of the thoughts here. You can see them in front of you. The death happened to me. Death happens, right? People often feel, so why me? How could this happen to me? How could my loved one die? Everyone dies, right? Everyone dies. But it feels like it's very much our own experience when it happens to us, that nobody else, that this is a unique experience, and that's not true. So we want to change that thought from this happened to me. that personalization to death happens, right? I'm a victim versus I'm a victor, right? Everybody who's had a loss feels a victim to some. Again, why me? How could this happen to me? I look at all my friends and their spouses are fine, their mothers are still alive, they're able to do all these things with their loved ones, and I can't. I'm a victim. But you're here and you've survived this loss. It doesn't necessarily feel good, but you survive. So we want to change that to I'm a victor. Cancer or death was a punishment, right? That you were personally punished by this. And you know what we know is that cancer and death are random. We don't really have an explanation why, you know, other than some few instances of things that directly cause cancer, we don't really know. Why does one person get cancer over the other all the time? And why does one person survive with a particular type of cancer while another one doesn't? It happened because of something I did versus there's nothing I could have done. I go back to an example I used earlier. Especially in the end time, people tend to want to blame themselves for, and by people I mean those of you here, tend to want to blame themselves for the death of the person, right? We want to skip ahead to the last thing that happened and assume that's what caused the death, right? So we have someone with stage 4 cancer who's been sick for many years and they die. But about an hour before they died, you noticed they were really in pain and you asked the hospice nurse to give them some more morphine because they seemed to be in so much pain. And then they died. And you say, I shouldn't have asked the nurse to give more morphine. They're dead because of what I did, right? We want to change that thought, right? We want to change that thought because no, it wasn't that last thing. It was the fact that they had cancer, that they were very sick, that this was what was going to happen, and that you did not cause that. So again, we want to change those kind of thoughts. My story is the saddest. Too, my story has sad parts. This is where we work in some of the stuff we just talked about. How can we rewire the brain to have some more of those positive memories, right? The story is the saddest. There's lots of beautiful things that have come from your story in your life other than this loss, right? You need to call those things up and show that it's not an all or nothing situation. I see my loved one in their last days versus I see my loved one on a happy day, right? Here's the balance again, right? Those last days are awful, right? But many of you who I see here sitting in front of me, I know were married to your spouses for 40 years or something like that, right? Your life together with them was not just those last days. Your life was a lot longer than that. And they were filled with many happy days, right? We need to call those things up. Okay, so see the last thing, it says you can change your thoughts, purple elephant. Okay, here's why I have that on there. Right now, everybody's thinking about something. Okay, think about whatever you're thinking about at the moment. Doesn't matter what it is, just think about it. Now I want you to take that out of your mind and I want you to think about a purple elephant. Picture the purple elephant. Picture the color, the trunk, the size. Just really think about that. I assume everybody was able to think about a purple elephant, right? Okay, well, did I make you change your thought? Yeah, you can change your thought, right? The idea of that exercise is you can change your thought. So when you are sitting there with your grief thoughts, when you're feeling a fear of moving forward, when you're feeling of paralysis in your grief, you can change those thoughts just like you did now. You're capable of it, right? It's important to remind yourself of that. Substitute for those happy days stories, substitute for those good times. That's what we want to move toward. This ties with that. Don't forget the middle, right? Get so fixated in grief on those last months, the last weeks, last days, right? You had all those years with that person, right? Give yourself permission to call those things up. Give yourself permission to keep loving them. and you'll be experiencing a combination of what we call grief bursts and love bursts, right? And I'm sure you've already had some of this. There might be days where you're just, oh, all of a sudden overwhelmed with this burst of grief. You're doing pretty well, and then you're just pulled down, right? Those are normal, right? But don't forget that there's also love bursts, right? Those periods of time where maybe you see a photograph, or you hear a song and you're filled with those love bursts, those wonderful bursts of thoughts of the loving relationship you had with them. These are part of the process, right? They're going to come and go, and it's going to be just sort of tolerating them, not getting too dragged down by those grief bursts, because a love burst is probably not going to be that much further behind. Talk about how you felt good in the relationship, not the regrets. So many times people in grief say, I wish I had spent more time. I wish I had, I wish I had, I wish I had, right? That doesn't really serve any purpose other than to make you feel more depressed and to keep you more stuck. Let's talk about how good you felt in the relationship, all the wonderful things you did do for your spouse. Those are the things we want to remember. All right, the stuff. Now, we talked many times in groups and whatever about cleaning out the closet, but now we're going to tie that cleaning out the closet to this idea of meaning, right? So belongings and stuff can really become a trap because it can really delay our finding of meaning, right? And I love the second one. Remember, you're the most obvious piece of evidence that your loved one lived. You are. Your love for them, in many cases, your children together, your home together, you are the symbol of them still here. Right? When you get bogged down with their stuff because you're afraid that letting go of that stuff is letting go of them, you're slowing yourself down to healing. Now, this is for those here who are really very newly bereaved. Please don't feel this comment is any pressure to run into the closet and dump the stuff tonight. Okay, it does take some time, right? If you're still in that very early phase, and we talked about those 3 parts of the meaning making model, it's not time for you to do it. But as you continue to move along and engage more in the world, hanging on to these things are slowing you down. Photograph the stuff and then let it go. Right? Share the stuff with a charity, let someone enjoy it. That's bringing meaning to that. That's bringing meaning to your loved one, right? Having their stuff serve a greater purpose. A legacy could be a memorial page on Facebook. Upload your photos to something like that and have that there for friends and family to check into, to see all those photos. That's a way to remember them, to bring meaning to their lives. Meaning through legacy. Again, we touched a little bit on this, but let's talk about how you maintain their legacy. Finding meaning in their life and finding meaning in your own life really has a lot to do with how you find and keep alive a legacy for them, right? Foundation, working in a soup kitchen, donations should be their honor, volunteer. You can do all these things in memory and love of your loved one. Try to find something that connects with them, right? Just doing a random thing may not bring you the same connection, but something that they would have enjoyed or was important to them. Maybe they really used to volunteer themselves at the soup kitchen and you didn't, but now you do, right? Write down memories in a memory book or online for family to carry, again, this legacy through generations. Observe traditions that are meaningful to that person. It can be as simple as cooking their favorite dish on a holiday, to observing a religious celebration, anything that they found meaningful, you can do. Caring for your children. This is a great way that we honor the legacy of our loved one, caring for their children, caring for their pets. Continuing to do some of the work that they did here, following through with that. So how you remember someone is part of their legacy, but it also helps to bring meaning to your loss, right? It keeps them alive for you, but it also creates meaning for you in the good works, in the connections you're forming, and then that's sort of the double blessing. You may even want to visit places they love. either places you visited together or someplace they always wanted to go. You might go there, you might sprinkle their ashes there, or you might just go there and do all the things you knew that they loved to do. For those who are more spiritual, you can find meaning through this idea of an afterlife, right? Hopes that they have gone to heaven, for example, hopes that they're surrounding you, whatever that may be, might look like for you based on your faith or just your spirituality, right? That can bring a lot of meaning if you feel that there is a connection to something more spiritual. You may also find meaning in the fact that from a spiritual standpoint, that you were able to be there for your loved one at the last moment, to pray with them, perhaps, to bring a priest or a rabbi by, to do something that really honored that and made a connection to their faith and their spirituality. Other ways to find meaning really is combating or fighting against what we call the 3 Ps, right? Personalization. It was my fault, right? It wasn't your fault, right? You got to fight against that every day. Pervasiveness. Loss has destroyed my life. There's still hope and happiness to be found. And the permanence. I'll never get rid of this hole in my heart. To my pain is going to change, right? It's going to soften. It's going to evolve. It may not feel really good now, but it's going to change. And these are 3 places we really get stuck. Personalization, pervasiveness, and permanence. We have to battle against these on a daily basis. Again, finding meaning in why they lived. Think about why they lived, right? Your person, for however long they were here, did a lot of things, had a lot of connection with other people, right? So what was their why? It can be helpful for you to understand that and think about that. Why did they live? What was their purpose, their meaning? Maybe it's because they brought children to you and other family. Maybe they taught you about something that helped you to become an advocate for something. Maybe they inspired you to excel at your job, to excel as a parent, to do something to, climb Mount Everest. I don't know, whatever you did, but maybe they were the ones who supported you in doing those kinds of things. Maybe they helped you to gain friends and knowledge along the way, right? And now maybe in their loss, they are still having that why by inspiring you to think about how to change your life. Are they inspiring you to travel, to find a new job, to take up an artistic endeavor? There's so much meaning here in this. You just have to look for it because it's there. Okay, so meaning reminders, kind of coming to the end now. We're talking about some of the reminders to keep. How do I best honor the years they did not get? They're gone. You're here. From now until the end of your lives, there's going to be a lot of years. How are you going to honor them across these years? How are you going to honor those years in a way that makes you proud and makes them proud? How do you create meaning in your life that really, really honors them? So the important thing to remember, like we said earlier, is that finding meaning requires choice and movement. It doesn't just happen. It doesn't just, you wake up one day and suddenly you've got it all figured out. It's taking these baby steps. It's replacing those thoughts that keep you stuck with the positive thoughts, right? It's recognizing that you still love, despite the physical separation, that your love is still there and you are still connected with them, right? Remember, most of all, that you might think in loss that your loved one was the only person who gave your life meaning. My life is meaningless now, many people say. They're not the only person and they're not the only thing in life that gives your life meaning, right? Meaning is still in you. Even if you're not feeling it now, it doesn't mean it can't be found. So remember, you can create your meaning. No one can create our meaning for us besides ourselves. Other people help us. They help guide us along the way. They might teach us things that help us in the search for our meaning, but we can only create our own meaning. So don't lose sight of that. And also remember that you can continue to connect meaningfully with those who are still living, whether that's your children, your family, or forming new connections. right? This is going to bring more meaning to your life as well. So what's the decision for everybody here, right? Do you want to heal or not heal? Not making a decision to take these steps forward is a decision, right? It's a decision that you're choosing not to, right? So hopefully we want to talk about, at least tonight, thinking about, yes, I know I want to do this. I might not be ready to do it yet. I might only be able to take baby steps, but I know that I want to work on healing. I know that I want to find my meaning, my purpose, while still honoring the meaning of my loved one's life, right? The decision to live fully is about being present in life, and your love and your loss are intertwined, right? You know this. You wouldn't feel as sad and mournful if you didn't have such great love for this person, right? Love is always a risk. The more you love, the more the loss hurts. So this is part of the process. So let's reframe that story to how blessed you were to have had such a great love, that you're mourning them so deeply, right? All those good times. So again, living again is decision. It's a declaration. You are taking charge of this now. It won't be done for you or take charge of for you. The intent has to precede the actions, right? The intent and the decision that I want this has to come first. And then you figure out the actions to take, hopefully some of the ones we presented tonight that will help you to start moving in that direction. And every small decision is a step forward. Just the decision to get up in the morning and get out of bed and take on the day is a decision toward forming your meaning. So again, in conclusion, remember, meaning is relative and personal. For everybody here tonight, it's going to be different, right? Depending on where you are in the grief trajectory, depending on your past history, your loved one, how long you were together, all of that stuff. It's going to take time. That's the one thing that we know. It does take time. And it's meaning, if anybody came tonight with the idea that they were going to leave with the idea of why someone died, it's impossible to figure that out, right? That's a meaning that unfortunately we just can't ever know, right? Why it had to be them, why it happened to them when it happened to them. So meaning doesn't equal understanding that. And it certainly doesn't negate your loss in any way, right? Your loss was not a lesson or a test to see how strong you were. I mean, loss just happens. It happens to all of us. Everyone here in this room is here, myself included, right? Because we've had loss. So it's up to you to think about how you're going to find your meaning. Make these meaningful connections. Replace the painful memories with the positive memories. And know that even the smallest moments in your life can connect you to some meaning about your loved one. So a lot of what we talked about tonight is loosely based on a book that's a relatively new book that's out called Finding Meaning by David Kessler. David Kessler is an authority on grief. And I love this quote from him because I think it really speaks to what we're talking about. And he says that people often think there's no way to heal from severe loss. And I believe that is not true. You heal when you can remember those who have died with more love than pain. When you find a way to create meaning in your own life in a way that will honor their life. It requires a decision and a desire to do this, but finding meaning is not extraordinary. It's ordinary. It happens all the time, all over the world. And I think that's a great quote because it's something that many people have done before you. It's something that you're capable of doing, right? It might feel like so hard to you, but it's something that you're able to do. And I'll point out that for those of you who are not familiar with David Kessler lost his young son. After being a grief expert for many years, he went through such a traumatic loss himself of a young child. And so this is possible no matter whatever the type of loss is. So we have some time now. We have plenty of time for questions. So I'm going to shut this down, stop my sharing and get on screen. And if you type in, I'll open up the chat box here. So if anybody would like to type in the chat box, and hopefully I've got the chat box right, and Lisa will help me if I don't. Any questions? It can be about what you heard tonight, or it can just be about anything related to grief or anything that you're struggling with as you're going through this. And I'm hoping I can see everybody's chats. Maybe somebody should just chat hi to me so I know that I'm getting the chats.
Hey,
there we
Doc,
go. Thank you.
if anyone also wants to take themselves off mute and ask it, that's totally acceptable.
Yes,
as well.
sure. Absolutely. You can ask or you can chat, whatever you feel. And I can't see everybody entirely, so just shout your first name out and your question. Or type it.
Where does it say chat? I'm sorry.
Oh, so down at the bottom of your screen, somewhere in the middle where you have your mute buttons and stuff.
Yes, it says chat.
Okay, hold on.
I see that where it says chat.
Do you see, you have to click and open the chat on your thing. So click chat, and then it should open up a white box.
On the right?
Yeah, mine's on the right, but everybody depends on their screen. So mine's on the right. I don't know where yours happens to be.
Does it have anything in it, or is it just a blank box? I guess.
Well, mine has some messages that a few people sent me that say hello. But
If you hover your cursor at the bottom of the screen,
I see. Yeah, I see at the bottom where it says to everyone, and then I typed in hi. I don't know if you got that.
I did. I did get a hi.
Okay, then I did it. Okay, I'm ready.
Okay. Oh yeah, anybody can just unmute and shout out the questions if you have any. No questions? I was so thorough that nobody has a question.
I
We
thought that
have
was,
copies of the slides.
You know what, it's gonna be, I know it's gonna be posted online. I will try to. They're pretty big file to send, but I know they're going to, they recorded this, I believe, and it's going to be posted. That's what I hear. So
it's all recorded.
it's all recorded. Yeah, I don't, it's pretty, I'll see. We'll talk about it later, Barbara. I'll see if I can get them down to a small type thing, because the regular slides are pretty
If
long.
I can go to it on YouTube or whatever, that's fine.
Okay, great. Other thoughts? Anything resonate with people or not resonate with people?
I think it's interesting that
I
you
have a question. Can you hear me?
Oh,
Yes, now we can hear you.
okay.
The other day I was filling out an application on the phone, and the question was, are you married or unmarried or single? And I did not know what to say.
Ah, that is a wonderful question. Has anybody else had that same experience?
I have, and I asked the doctor, I said, so what am I? It doesn't say widowed here, it doesn't, you know, and he said, you're single.
Yeah, and I wonder when he said that, Jacqueline, thank you for bringing it up, because that's a great thing that happens. I mean, not a great thing that happens. It's a great question. Susan, how did you feel when he said that? You're single.
Terrible, terrible. Absolutely. Like, no, I'm not. I'm not.
Yes. Yes.
I don't.
Understandable. That's a really difficult thing. And that's one of the hardest things when people first have their loss, of course, is they talk a lot about the forms, right? What am I, right? Even if they do have widowed, right? It just feels awful to have to check that box.
Well, it'd be better than nothing. I mean, single is not appropriate to me, I guess.
And if they give everyone room for their pronouns, why can't they give us room for our status?
Well, I think it's a great question about the widow and married, unmarried, because I'm sure that most of you here feel very much married, even though your partner, for those who are here for partner loss, feel very much married despite your partner not being physically present, right? Yeah.
It
Sorry
happened.
that happened to you, Jacqueline, but it's unfortunate that I think that people who fill out these forms or put these forms together don't think about those things. I want to address a question that's in the chat. I don't know if everybody can see all the questions, but Debbie's question, I know you're going to say each person takes their own time, but how long does the deep, heavy grief process take? Debbie, you've asked the most impossible question for anyone to answer, because it really is about the individual. Like we said in the presentation, a lot of how we grieve has to do with our own family history, how grief was looked at, the type of relationship we had with the person, all of those things. And I don't like to commit to anything too specific. I will tell you, if it helps, that, you know, that the first 3 years are an interesting time, are the most interesting time in grief, right? The first year is all about getting through that year first. So it's a very tough year, right? The first, everything, anniversary, holidays, all of that stuff. So people say that's very tough for that reason. The second year, people will also say it's tough for different reasons, right? That is about the permanence of the loss. We've gotten through all those firsts. And now that the paperwork's done and the first tax returns are done and all of that, now we sit with the reality of the loss, and that second year can feel really tough. Most people will say by the third year, they're starting to feel more normal again, if we could say that. But I don't like to tie anybody down to that time frame, but that would probably be a way to look at it. But I will also say that we have long-term bereavement groups at the center. Now we do 1 to 3 years for that reason, because of what I just described, but we've had them for people who were there 4 and 5 years. We've had them with people who were engaged and got married during the course of the group, but still were mourning their spouse, right? Even though they had moved on with someone else, right? They still grieved. So tough question to ask, but certainly one that we hear a lot. Okay, hang on a second. Yeah, we'll work on the slides. Susan, I saw your thing. How do I reframe the thoughts of how lonely I feel eating alone every night? So this is another great question. I think that probably most people here, this is one of the ones we hear a lot with grief, right? The cooking for one, eating alone. Evenings are tough, partly because of this. I think the reframing of the thought here is, I don't know that there's something you're going to specifically be able to tell yourself that's going to make that better, but I would say in that situation, it would really be more about how to create a different scenario with the eating that feels less familiar to you or less like what it was with your spouse. So if you always ate at the kitchen table, I might change up where I ate. I might create, I know we're in COVID now still, but I'd probably change things up a little bit. I'd make some time to eat out more. I would have a friend over. I would do different things till you can make that transition with a dining alone, because, you know, doing it the same way at the same table in the same location is certainly going to feel difficult. Think about some other things that help you. A lot of people talk about keeping the TV on, or changing things up, changing the time that they eat. You know, just making some differences can sometimes help with something like that. Other questions? Other than the slides, I don't see anything else. Anybody else have any questions? That easy? You're letting me get away with that easy? Where does everybody think? I'd love to hear from a couple people on where do you think you are on this quest for meaning? Is it something you have even thought about? Is it something you're toying with? Has it even crossed your mind? Go ahead, Andy. I see you're about to unmute.
Yeah, it's something I really haven't thought about. And that's what interests me to do this. And I saw the subject line when you first presented this to us weeks ago, or mentioned it to us. I thought, wow, that's interesting. Meaning and grief, you know. And, you know, I'm still struggling with that, but I'm struggling with not only grief, but I'm struggling with some guilt. And I think that a lot of that was due to the complications of COVID and not being able to see her in the hospital. But I think one of the things late in the presentation today was about finding meaning in the years my wife will not be here, that I can do. So that caught my interest. I mean, thinking of the things that interest her. She was a social worker. She loved helping people. I've always wanted to volunteer, but because of COVID, I haven't been able to really. So maybe there's something I can do there that will help me. So it got the gears turning in my head. So
Terrific.
thank you for that.
Oh, well, terrific. And that's really the whole idea of this evening, is not to provide you with the answers specifically on meaning, because they're going to be different for everyone here tonight. It's really to get the wheels turning, because it's very normal to get mired in the sadness of grief and the emotions and all of that and feel very stuck. But if we start the process of beginning to think about, could there be meaning? What does meaning look like? How do I honor their life and honor my own life and the years that are left in my life? That's a movement toward meaning, right? So that's it. If that just got the wheels turning, Andy, I consider that a success, right? To just even start to introduce that into the thought process.
Hopefully that'll help,
Yeah.
My biggest struggle is the guilt part of it, which this is not the time or place to go into right now, but
Sure.
I
Sure. And
got a
guilt
big
and
hurdle.
feeling the guilt, right? If you think back to one of the early slides, feeling the guilt of the meaning, theory of meaning or whatever, that's normal in these earlier phases of loss, to have those emotions and to go back and forth, right? Have days where you're not feeling guilty, but then all of a sudden it creeps back in again, right? And as the presentation said, being able to replace that thought some way, to let go of that thought, is going to help with your forward movement, right? Right, because when we talk about guilt, it means that you're narrowing down your interactions with your spouse to just that one little period of time, right?
Right.
Not the lifetime of love and giving and all the things you did right, right? So we need to kind of broaden that, replace that with all the times you did everything just the way you liked and really took care of her.
Right.
Kathleen, I see not a question. Okay, found the comment interesting about requiring choice and movement. Yeah, it is a choice, right? Because we can very easily get stuck in, we can really get stuck in this, right? We have to make a decision. Like Andy just said a few minutes ago, this got me thinking. So now maybe I'll take some steps. Maybe I'll think about, what could I do to honor her work as a social worker somehow? Is there something I don't know, not to give you too many ideas there, Andy, but could I volunteer somewhere? Could I do something, right? This is requiring a choice on your part and forward movement on your part. It doesn't just happen, right? Meaning doesn't just pop into your one day. Oh, I suddenly get the meaning of all of this. That's not going to happen. You have to create it. Other questions or thoughts? Everybody's quiet. Everybody ready to end the day? All right, last call. I didn't miss anybody's. I don't think I missed anything from anybody.
I think with time, I've been able to dwell less on the horror and start thinking more about, the wonderful times in our life, which is comforting to me, because, it's nothing worse than, dwelling on those last moments, as you said. And I think time has just been, the answer. In the beginning, I was shell-shocked and, feel like it's getting better.
Yes, absolutely. But I would venture to say, Marcy, since I know you from group, without revealing anything that's your confidential information, I would venture to say that I know that you've also done some things to take steps moving forward, which has probably helped a lot with that. So again, I think it still goes back to Kathleen's comment in the chat about this idea of choice and movement, right? Movement is requiring that choice to take up opportunities, right? To do things. right? I have somebody in the group, and I won't call out names because they may not want to speak, who I know made a choice to go away for a month or so somewhere, right? To perhaps kind of explore these thoughts and think about the meaning of life going forward and all that. And so that's a choice, right? That wouldn't have just happened sitting at home, perhaps. Maybe it would, but I doubt it. It was a choice to say, I want to work on this. I want to think about this. So where do I go and how do I do that? Anything else? Don't be shy. Last chance. Okay. Sounds like everybody's being quiet. It's the end of the night. Everybody's probably getting hungry, ready to take a break. Well, I just want to thank you all for your time and for being here this evening. It's always my pleasure to be here with all of you. For those of you, I'm looking at the names, and I know a lot of you are already in a group, or I know if I don't know you or you don't know me and you're thinking about it, just keep in mind that the center offers all kinds of support for bereavement, wonderful support. We have support groups for all family loss, spousal loss, long-term grief, all kinds of things like that. So please take advantage of those if you need to, as well as individual counseling if you don't feel ready to be part of a group and groups aren't your things. So it is, as I said, always say in these presentations, it is my honor and privilege to work with those who are bereaved. I consider it a gift to me that I'm able to do this kind of work. And I thank you for being here. And any other questions, you can certainly reach offline to me. My email is on the website. Please reach out if you have any questions and you're too shy to ask tonight. And I wish you all a very good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.